Calling the meeting back to order from the break. This is the annual Public Safety Citizens Advisory Board's public forum, and tonight's topic is medical marijuana in Blue Springs, the new Missouri law. We'll have a guest speaker in a moment. First off, we want to start off by the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, and just before we get to the topic, a couple of people I want to introduce and recognize. We have City Councilman from District 1, Jerry Kaler's here. From District 2, Kent Edmondson. District 3, Susan Culpepper. We have Tom Cole, the Director of Community Development for Blue Springs. And we have Assistant Director Mike Mallon from that group. Police Department's well represented by a group of officers, particularly Chief Muntz, Deputy Chief Stacy Edwards, Captain Jeff Sargent, and a whole bunch of others. Previous chairman of this board is here, Tom Eckert. Glad to see him here. The board members, we have Cindy Hood, Ellie Welcher, Patrick Mitchell, myself, Robert Morton, and Natalie Belkins. Then we have the secretary for keeps our records and keeps us straight, Raquel Stark. Technical support back in the booth, we have Dave Watson, and we have Miranda Munsterman. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Chief Muntz for his introduction.
Jackie Summers is here.
Jackie Summers for the city is here too, the city attorney. Okay, now up to you, Chief.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Welcome everybody for coming to our annual forum. As he said, tonight we're going to discuss medical marijuana. So before I introduce the guest speaker, I just wanted to say a few things. One, if you want to ask a question after the event, we'll take questions after. We'll ask that you come to the podium, say your name, and then ask your question so everybody can hear it. We're going to do a Facebook Live tonight while we're doing this. And Miranda's going to keep track of the questions that may come in on social media. So we may interrupt some of the questions from the floor for some of the questions from social media. So if you have those questions, send them in on Facebook as well. And then if the board has any questions of Mike during his presentation, feel free to ask. We'll allow the board to ask questions during the presentation. And then if you have questions after the presentation, you get first shot. It's your show tonight. Okay? Also, I mentioned state your name. One of the things that I wanted to say is that, we're talking about medical marijuana in the state of Missouri, and we're really focusing on how Blue Springs is going to enforce those statutes, what our ordinances are going to say, how are our officers going to react on the street. I want to just say that, recreational marijuana is not legal in the state of Missouri, and it's not legal in the city of Blue Springs. Medical marijuana is legal, so we will enforce that appropriately. If there are any questions about how we'll do that, I'll kind of go over that after Mike's presentation. I think after he speaks, a lot of this will make a lot more sense. I get a lot of questions about, well, what about this? What about a business? How many businesses will we have? How will it affect my neighborhood? How many plants can I have? Well, you need to research the state statutes and the city ordinances, and I think Mike will address a lot of that. We are slated to present to the city council in a future city council meeting real soon our criminal code revisions to our ordinances that govern possession of controlled substances, that deal with marijuana possession. So we will have in our code of ordinances online at some point for citizens to review what you can and cannot do when it's related to possession, growing, all that stuff related to medical marijuana. But that's it. That's what I wanted to say. So I'm going to turn it over to Mike Mallon. We're pleased to have him here tonight. He is the Assistant Director for the Community and Economic Development Department. All yours, Mike.
Thank you, Chief. Thank you, Board. Pleasure to be here. I think this is a wonderful opportunity for the citizens of Blue Springs to get as much information as we can provide about medical marijuana and how it's going to be in our city. Just a little bit of history of myself. I've been pretty much immersed with medical marijuana for basically the past year, doing the research and writing the laws and rules for the city. But prior to that, I was in Colorado for a number of years, working for another municipality about the size of Olathe, and was there when they both went through medical marijuana adoption and recreational marijuana adoption. So I have some pretty good experience with that, which is frankly why I believe I got tapped on the shoulder to do it here for the city of Blue Springs. But because of that, Missouri passed this through the constitutional amendment vote back in 2018. And the way that was written was done to really learn from what other states have done, what worked well, what didn't work well. Some people may agree with that, some people may not, but they really did try to do a good job and take the best practices of some other states that have gone through this, and try to avoid some of the pitfalls that a number of states that may have approved this 5 years ago still don't have a program up and running, because there's a lot of legal framework that goes into this, and how does it get governed and organized, and how does it get taxed, and where's the tax money go, and there's a whole side to this. So I think Missouri has done pretty well. Like I said, the medical marijuana basic information was approved. There were 3 different voting amendments on that ballot election, and amendment number 2 was the one that passed, which included a constitutional amendment. Approximately 73% of voters in Blue Springs, from exit polling data, voted to approve medical marijuana in the city, which is very high. The constitutional amendment makes it part of the Missouri Constitution. It's now Article 14 of the Missouri Constitution, which means that it can't really be changed unless it's done through the legislature. The state department that's in charge of this is the Department of Health and Senior Services. So I may refer to that as the DHSS on occasion. They're the ones that are really responsible for putting this into place, and how this is all going to roll out. So in about January of this past year, they started, the DHSS started to solicit feedback, meet with trade groups, the cannabis industry trade groups, as well as doctors and retailers, have a very strong organized lobby. And so they had a big, they worked together with the DHS to create rules for the implementation of medical marijuana in Missouri. Those rules were put out in draft form for a number of months, and cities had the opportunity to weigh in on them and to offer feedback, but the industry also had a way to do it as well. And so some of the rules that the state has given to us are there to favor the industry, and some are there to allow some governments to retain some local control. So what did the Constitution do? It expressly...
Somebody's leaning on
Oh,
the
yeah.
light switch over there. Press the top one. There you go.
The Constitution expressly prohibits any local government from prohibiting medical marijuana within their city, or to make the operation of that unduly burdensome by imposing rules that, in essence, would make it impossible for medical marijuana to be in that given city. So that was probably something learned from one of the other states. The state of Colorado did allow cities to opt out of the program, and so you had cities that said, nope, we're a family city, we're not going to get involved in this. And then the next city right next door said, sure, bring it on, we want all the tax dollars And then the city that originally said no saw all the tax dollars and said, uh-oh, time to get into the game. And so the Missouri Constitution said, we're not going to do that. Nobody can outlaw this or make it essentially impossible to do business. What the constitutional amendment allows us, or local governments, to do is to regulate the time, place, and manner of the operation for medical marijuana facilities, such as establishing which zoning districts, the different types of facilities that are out there and where they can be located within the city, permitted uses versus requiring public hearings and conditional use permits for every operation, hours of operation, as well as some other operational characteristics. And so that's what we did when we crafted our ordinances. The state Amendment 2 also had in a maximum 1,000-foot separation requirement that basically says any type of medical marijuana facility has to be at least 1,000 feet from any church, school, or daycare. But it also gave the cities the ability to reduce that buffer for certain areas of the city where there could be a high concentration of schools, or to help promote a certain part of the city, like downtown, to help create some more economic development driver there. So I'll go through kind of what our ordinances did, but this is just a little bit of the background. So the timeline as to where we are today. Applications for all the different types of facilities, which I'll get into in a minute, were accepted by the state in August of this year. The city council here has approved 3 separate ordinances that adopted Unified Development Code regulations. So we've already had this before city council 3 different times, and we knew that it would take a multitude of times to do this. The first set of amendments were really to establish where these facilities could go, because as you can imagine, those facilities really wanted to know or hit the ground running with trying to secure real estate, buildings, and trying to figure out where they want to set up their business. We also adopted, so that was in May when we adopted those. Then we realized that we needed to adopt some other ones because something changed, or the federal or the state rules were finally published July 1st, and that changed some of the rules that had been in draft form that we had already adopted as law. So we had to go back and clean that up too. And then just a couple others that one related to downtown, and then another one that was based upon the final rules so that our law matched the state law, basically. November 30th, the state has until November 30th, which is just around the corner, to complete the blind scoring of all the different applications. And then per Amendment 2, Missouri must approve or deny applications no later than December 31st. So we will find out here very shortly, within the next month or so, who basically won the lottery in their mind, and who gets chosen to open these different types of facilities. There's a specified number of facilities per congressional district as determined or as outlined in the state right now. So there's a finite number of especially dispensary applications, which is going to be the retail storefront where the medical marijuana is purchased. There's also caps on some of the others, but the big one that you've read about in the news and that you've seen in Kansas City is the dispensary applications. And there's only going to be 192 distributed throughout the entire state. But they've taken in, I think, well over $4 or $6 million in application fees alone to help pay for this kind of operation. And so there will be a lot of disappointed people. Not everybody, and it's a very expensive process. And so there are going to be some disappointed people who wanted to open a dispensary or a cultivation facility who just aren't going to get the license because there's only a finite number of them as of today. Doesn't mean that somehow the state can't come in and max and change that number. But when the rules came out, they said this is going to be the number. There's a minimum number that has to be there, and they could have set a maximum higher. But right now it's the number that is what it is. So we should know when those applications are approved within the next month. There will be a little bit of a lag time because even the cultivation facilities which is where they grow the medical marijuana, it has to take time to grow. And so recent estimates from what I've seen put dispensaries starting to open in late spring or early summer of 2020. So potentially 6 more months. I just want to point out that medical marijuana and CBD oil shops and things like that are entirely differently regulated. They may have some crossover if they get approved for a medical marijuana license, but the normal CBD store that you see across the street right now doesn't automatically get a license because they're in the CBD business. They're viewed as two separate and regulated industries. So the laws that the city had to adopt, we had a work session with City Council and multiple meetings to determine which zoning districts we were going to allow these different facilities to go in. We had discussions about whether they would be allowed by right, in that if the property is zoned correctly, then they can go in there and there's no other special review or special public hearing needed. And so had to figure out if that's the way the City Council wanted to go. The distances from the schools, daycares, and churches, the city maintained the 1,000-foot separation for churches, schools, and daycares for all but one of the different facilities. And that 1,000-foot separation is actually measured as somebody would reasonably and lawfully walk. So it's not a straight line as the crow flies buffers, if you will. And so it's made it a little bit dicey at times when we're trying to figure out if a building is appropriately meeting the distance or not. The City Council voted to reduce the separation for a testing facility down to 300 feet. The thought being that those testing facilities are where they're testing the quality and the potency of the marijuana. And so it's kind of like a laboratory use, and that they could be potentially bringing in some well-paying jobs. And so the city really wanted to make us be available should a testing facility want to locate within the city. So by reducing that buffer, it made us potentially more of an attractive place for a testing facility to open. In addition, there was input provided by Downtown Alive and the Downtown Review Board and City Council to eliminate the buffer entirely for the downtown zoning district. With the justification being that we're trying to have economic activity downtown. And frankly, if you're going to have a dispensary downtown, it's probably a pretty safe location with the police station right next door. We set hours of operations, which I'll get into, and other operational regulations that are required by the state rules. So I'll get into those in a minute. So for the places of the buffers, the distances from schools, daycares, and churches, we had to use the definitions that were provided to us by the state and in the Constitution. So a church means a permanent building regularly used as a place of religious worship. This is a little bit different than some other cities' definitions of a church, but this is a building that is a permanent building that is regularly used as a place of worship. So if it's a church group that's meeting, say at Vesper Hall on the weekends, that doesn't count as a church under the state's definition. The daycare is defined as a child care facility as defined by the state statutes and is licensed by the state of Missouri. And the schools are elementary and secondary schools, any public school as defined in section in the state statutes, or private school giving instruction in a grade not higher than the 12th grade. Does not include any private school in which education is primarily conducted in private homes. So this isn't, they didn't count instances where there's homeschooling going on. So the different types of medical marijuana facilities. Apologize for all the text. But this is what they are defined as. There. The medical marijuana dispensary is probably going to be the most visible public-facing facility that everybody notices. This is going to be the storefront where you buy the retail medical marijuana, or buy the the edibles or the gummies or the ointments or anything associated with it. This is the retail front face where that's going to happen. The medical marijuana cultivation facility is a indoor or outdoor place where they're going to grow the medical marijuana. The medical marijuana infused product manufacturing facility is where they're going to basically manufacture the marijuana into edibles, cookies, gummies, ointments, lotions, things of that nature. That's a separate manufacturing process. I mentioned the medical marijuana testing facility, so they will be, it's certified to acquire, test, and transport marijuana. And then one of the last ones that the state threw at us was actually a medical marijuana transportation facility. And that is kind of like an armored car service or car service that transports medical marijuana from one of these facilities to another facility, or even deliver it to a person's residence. We did have inquiries from all of these in the city. When the list came out of where they were, we didn't get all of them, I don't think, but we definitely did get some medical marijuana dispensaries. Don't believe we had any licenses for cultivation facility, maybe one. Infused products, I think we had 2. I don't believe we had a testing facility, and we did get 1 transportation facility. So in terms of finding or determining where these could go in the city, we used our zoning table, and I'll go through this briefly. The zoning classifications along the top are our zoning districts. So the GB is general business, and the RC is regional commercial. These are the zoning districts that you can see here in red. I know it's a pretty small map, but basically along all the corridors of the city. Blue Springs has a lot of road corridors, as you know. Woods Chapel, 40 Highway, I-70, 7 Highway, Adams Dairy Parkway, things of that nature. So almost all of the land around those corridors is commercially zoned for either general business or regional commercial. And so in looking at the best places to have those medical marijuana dispensaries first, that's the decision that was made, was to allow those in the general business and commercial zones. So much as 7 Highway, both north and south, a lot of 40 Highway running east and west, and Woods Chapel. The medical marijuana infused products manufacturing facility, as I mentioned earlier, is a little bit more of an industrial nature, and the chemicals and the basically transferring plants into edible products or other products was viewed more as an industrial use, and so we allowed those in the light industrial and the heavy industrial zones. Those are hard to see on this map because they're gray and a lot of the streets are all gray. But like for instance, up here by North Highway 7, that is gray. A lot of the property along 40 Highway out east of 7 Highway, and there is some on 40 Highway west of 7 Highway. That's that industrial zoning. The marijuana testing facility, we determined that because that's going to look more like a lab, like a Quest Diagnostics or something like that, it's really not going to have a negative impact on surrounding land uses. And frankly, without the signage going up on the building, most people aren't going to know that it's there. And so, again, when we reduced the buffer for that, we also wanted to allow that in more zoning districts to try to, make the city an enticable place for people to come in. The medical marijuana cultivation facility, again, like the manufacturing facility, is also kind of an industrial nature. So we viewed that as being in the light industrial or in heavy industrial. Chances are, given our location, kind of on the urban fringe, I wouldn't see a lot of outdoor medical marijuana activity in and around Blue Springs at the commercial level. There's just too many chances for theft, for damage, things of that nature. I would expect to see that in some of the more rural agricultural areas of Jackson County or even further south or central. So. And then the medical marijuana transportation facilities, again, is more like a car service. And so we opened that up to be allowed in general business, regional commercial, light industrial, and heavy industrial zones. The zoning map, again, showing primarily where the red and the pink are our commercial zones. That's where the dispensaries are likely going to be. With a city of about 55,000 people, just the pure numbers that we've gotten from the state and the estimates, we are expecting to see anywhere between maybe 2 to 4 dispensaries in the city. There just isn't that enough demand to be able to supply the city. And so I think that'll be reflected in the next map that I show you. Downtown. Downtown, like I said, was a little bit different of an animal to determine where they could be. The buffer requirement was reduced to nothing for churches, schools, and daycares. We do have some churches in downtown, and we don't really have any daycares, but we do have schools that fall within the downtown zone. And we had previously had a prohibition that you couldn't have a commercial medical marijuana use in a building that had a residential unit in it. And so the idea of someone living downstairs or upstairs with their medical marijuana dispensary being downstairs, we'd originally had that to not be allowed. But downtown is a little bit different of an animal because we do have some vertical mixed use buildings where you do have the apartments up top and then the retail storefronts down below. So it was thought that if there was a place to allow that in Blue Springs, downtown would probably be the best place. So they are allowed in all commercial zoning districts and medical marijuana dispensaries and testing facilities. The other facilities aren't allowed downtown at all. This is a map provided by the state which shows all of the different medical marijuana facility applicants and where they are located. These, I want to put a caveat out here that these are not awarded licenses at this point. That's not going to happen until November or December, but these are where people applied to the state to open a facility within Blue Springs. And as you can see, they're along all the corridors in the city. 7 Highway, predominantly 7 Highway, even as far north as Pink Hill, some out on I-70, but the main bulk is 7 Highway between Duncan and 40 Highway. We do have a couple out east and then or out west, and then one way down south. But as you can see, they're located kind of in the heart of the city. There's a lot of vacant commercial ground right now in the kind of that 7 Highway corridor with Long John Silver's going out of business, with Einstein Brothers Bagels, Winstead's, all of that thing. Those were popular places for people to inquire about because they're standalone buildings, and they don't have to worry if they can buy the building. They don't have to worry about a landlord and things of that nature. So that 7 Highway corridor was very popular. And as you can see, also, we do not have any cultivator. Well, according to the information provided by the state, it does not appear that we had any cultivation or infused products. Well, one infused product. I believe this one up here might be a cultivator too, so it may just be labeled wrong on the map. But predominantly, the licenses in Blue Springs are for dispensaries. So as part of the regulations, we adopted operational regulations. Hours of operations were restricted to 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. The medical marijuana facilities, the dispensaries, any of those facilities are not allowed to produce any noise, vibration, odor, air pollution, fire hazards, or water pollution. There's not allowed to be any outdoor operations and storage. There's no on-site usage allowed, so that is prohibited except in the very minor case. I think for a dispensary there's a very small provision that may allow it if you're trying to help administer the marijuana to a patient that doesn't know how to do it, if they're too old or sick or just don't know what they're doing. I think there is a provision that allows them to show you how to do it. Display of licenses must be done at all times within the building. Again, we did have the residential dwelling unit restrictions. there are some pretty strong ventilation requirements, so that there's not the big smell of medical marijuana being produced through the cultivation or through the infused products or even in the dispensary. The grade of marijuana that's going to be coming out does have a pretty strong odor, and so people will notice it. But the ventilation systems are being put in to help that so it doesn't travel between buildings or off property lines. So they have to provide a site plan and go through all of any site planning processes that anybody else would have to go through at the city. And they are under some very strict video surveillance and physical security regulations that came down from the state. The state wants to ensure that these are safe places, and so they have to have constant contact with the police department, alarms set up to go directly to the police department, lots of security measures for all of the different types of facilities, so to try to make them as safe as possible. So these are just the specific standards that we wrote. I just kind of briefly went over them. Something else that we did that some other cities may not have done is we said that if we're going to get a new facility, we wanted to put in some design standards for the architectural quality of the building, and that if they are going to move into a vacant building, we want the vacant building to be brought up to nicer standards with nice materials and things of that nature to help improve the overall look of the city. We didn't want them having the opposite effect, and then it somebody trying to do it on the cheap, and then it turns into looking cheap, and then it actually has a negative impact on the city. So that is where we are today, and that is pretty much what we've done in terms of the commercial operation of medical marijuana. There is the whole other side of this, which is the home grow, that we haven't tackled just yet. I believe we're working with our city attorney to draft that. But the medical marijuana cards, it's not a prescription. So that's a very big difference between a prescription and what they're calling a certification. You don't get a prescription for medical marijuana. You can't take that prescription into CVS or Walgreens or anything like that. It's a card from a doctor that says you are certified as having one of these 8 medical conditions, and that you can go purchase or grow your own medical marijuana. So those cards became available in July or August, and they had 30 days to approve or deny them. So we are well past that. So there's very high likelihood that people who've been given a card through the state are growing medical marijuana in the city. And so it's out there now. And there may be some impacts on the residents. You may smell it if it's coming from a neighbor's house. You may smell it if they're smoking it out on their back porch. As long as they're complying with all of the different laws that the state has put out and that the city has adopted, it's perfectly legal if they have their card. So it's out there. The number of plants that they're allowed to grow is all very specified, and how many people can be living in the same house and growing it, very specified. But these can be big operations and take up a whole basement or things of that nature. So. But they do need to be enclosed and locked and have all the security functions, not all of the same as a commercial, but pretty high security requirements as well. So that's all my presentation. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thanks, Mike. Does the board have any questions of Mike before we turn it over to the audience? One, Natalie, go ahead.
It might be a loaded question. Can you speak to the mixed bag of information we're getting from Colorado on a whole? More DUIs, more teens addicted, or not really? Statistics are kind of fudged one way or another to make it look like it has not had an impact. Recently I had a conversation with a police officer that assured me there was definitely a downside to the legal marijuana in Colorado.
Mike says he doesn't know the answer to that question. I've heard a lot of speculation on that as far as impairment. A lot of the states that have recreational and medical marijuana are dealing with how do you measure impairment? How is it affecting children, et cetera? Is it more prevalent? Is it not? And it's almost like you said. You can see statistics anyway. I'm not educated enough to answer that question. My fear is that we will see more impairment. And one of the things that I wanted to mention tonight was that, medical marijuana does not give you the license to consume marijuana and drive a vehicle or to operate machinery. So impairment is still impairment. If you operate a vehicle and you encounter an officer and you're under the influence of marijuana, there's a good chance you're going to get arrested and processed through court, and we'll see where that goes. Now, there are some differences between, for example, alcohol stays in your system, it's measurable, it's a set amount of time, we can show what that impairment level is. But if we can, on the roadside at a traffic stop, prove a level of impairment, then there you have it. I mean, but those cases will be challenged in court, they're challenged in other states. We'll work through that. However, if you're impaired, I don't recommend driving a vehicle, obviously. We are going to follow, as far as our officers and our staff, on how we enforce this. We'll follow the city ordinances and we'll follow the state statutes as best we can. I think in some of the other states I've seen some issues, and we'll tackle those issues as they come up. Not a very good answer to the question, but it's the best I can do.
It was kind of presidential.
I've never been called that. A few other things, but not presidential.
Well, being I come from a background of science, there are some facts, I think, that people need to know. It has a place. I'm not against marijuana, but there are clinical trials in medical journals that I read that talk about the memory loss, the long-term damage, other things.
And I think regardless, medical marijuana is here, as Mike said. It's out there. It's here. The state of Missouri has approved what the voters put in, and we'll deal with it.
Okay.
Any other questions from the board? Any questions from the audience? If you'd like to approach the podium in an organized manner, no rushing, please. Anybody has a question? Go ahead. Come on up. State your name and speak clearly.
My name's John Falkenstein. My question was to this gentleman, is the medical marijuana have the same potency as recreational?
I am not an expert on that, but my guess is yes, and it probably is higher.
Okay, because I've heard different things that it wasn't.
Yeah, that's one of the things that the state has put in is any type of marijuana that is sold or grown. Actually, they have what's called a seed to sale tracking system, and so every seed that is actually sold in Missouri has to be able to be tracked to what it became. And so, as part of the testing facility, any product, any seed, anything like that that is sold in the city has to have the potency on it so that the consumer knows how strong it is.
You mean like the percentage?
Yep. The amount of THC or CBD or that's in it has to be on the packaging.
Okay, that's what I wanted. Thank you.
Yeah, come on up. And while you're coming up, I've heard that, for example, on gummies and cookies, you have to follow the instructions on those, because if you consume 10 gummies, you're in a world of hurt, from what I understand. Half a gummy is all that's needed, or maybe, depending on the potency, a section of a cookie that you may not consume the whole cookie at one time. Go ahead.
My name is Lucas Huntsucker. I have a question. I just wondering if someone could clarify how gun rights are going to be affected by legal marijuana use.
Expand on your
gun
question.
rights. Do you give up your gun rights when you get a medical marijuana card?
You? Go ahead.
I believe that when you fill out a license for a gun, you have to check a box that says whether or not you're actively under the influence or actively using drugs. And so some of the articles that I've read say that it could impact it, yeah. But I don't know if anybody's had a definitive answer about that yet. So that could be one of the things that, you know, I don't think we're at the very beginning of this process. As it rolls out, I think the state legislators will enact more laws to try to help clarify some of these exact questions.
I one more question, if that's possible. For those that don't have a card for medical use of marijuana, is there any change in the penalties? I guess what I'm asking is, are you still in trouble if you get caught with weed?
Yes.
Okay.
And the penalties are the same. It hasn't changed. Recreational marijuana is not legal in the state of Missouri or the city of Blue Springs.
Okay.
And it will be enforced the same. Okay.
All right.
Hi, Mark Minden. I had a question on where you'd be allowed to use any place you can smoke, outdoor smoking areas at bars. Is it?
No. It's the way the laws are written is that it's mainly going to be an inside, not public use.
Is that part of the state, or is that part of the city code, or is that
It's part of the state code. There's no public consumption. You can't just walk down the street and smoke. That's a little tricky of a question because somebody could be walking down the street eating a cookie and nobody would know the difference. But bars, things of that nature, they're just now starting to pop up in California and Colorado, which have had recreational marijuana for a number of years. And so how that would roll out, I don't think we understand that yet, but my initial reaction would be no. It's designed to be done in the privacy of your own home.
What about like public intoxication laws? Do they automatically cover marijuana use, or is that a whole different area? I mean, they're two different things. So
You know, I haven't been asked that, but I would assume yes. It would be my assumption. We'll research that. But, you know, so we have, if you're publicly intoxicated to the point where you can't take care of yourself or impaired, then we step in. So that would be the same procedures.
and there's still no way to really tell how impaired you are through any testing, though, right? Other than performance testing.
Physical testing, so roadside impairment testing. You guys have any input to that? No? I'm seeing, okay.
But you don't have to do roadside testing, right?
No, but you know, there's levels of impairment that would be obvious. So if we can show that level of impairment that you're a danger to yourself or others, or you can't take care of yourself, then it'd be a protective custody situation.
Pretty vague, but still.
Yes. I think what we're going to have, you know, if you talk about the gun issues, that's a federal requirement, not a state requirement. When you talk about, you know, if you want to purchase a weapon, a lot of these things I think will be challenged, have been challenged in other states. And, you know, we're going to act in accordance with our ordinances and statutes to the best of our ability. And then if there's challenges down the road, either Supreme Court or court level, a lot of these things will be answered in court in the future. Do we have any social media questions, Marina?
We do. I have a question that was actually submitted via email from resident April Hatch. She says, I'm a registered nurse of 15 years, and I would like to ask how the police will respond to my very chronically ill patients when they have home cultivated cannabis. There have been issues and questions regarding this around the state, and my patients are worried they're going to be arrested. So much so, they're denying themselves needed treatment.
Again, we will follow the ordinances and do that professionally and fairly. I would think that if you're following the ordinance or the statute and you have a medical marijuana card or you want to apply for that and you're doing it within the state guidelines, or you have a caretaker that's doing that for you, you have no issues. You have no issues with the city. You have no issues with the police department. Does that make, I mean, agree, Mike? I have a question for you, Mike, that came in earlier. Since marijuana cannot be grown in the city right now, and medical marijuana cards are out there, how can you get marijuana?
The state's answer is that they are, the first seed obviously can't originate from inside the state of Missouri. And so they are kind of taking a don't ask approach. And they kind of just realize that the first seeds and the first products that are coming in, you can buy medical marijuana from a state, a neighboring state that allows it, and bring it in. But yeah, that was kind of a tricky question.
And right now, the only way it can be grown is by somebody who has medical marijuana card
Yes.
and can grow it at home.
That's
Because
correct.
there are no cultivation facilities, there are no dispensaries in the state yet.
Nope. There are no facilities, no facility licenses granted whatsoever, and so the only marijuana that is legal would be some marijuana that somebody had grown, and the two different cards that you can get as a home grow are basically a certification card or a certification to just use it and be able to possess it, and then there's also the certification card that says you can grow it. So there's those two different types. So yeah. So
Yeah. Go ahead, sir.
Yeah, I just have one more question. Where do you get a application for medical marijuana?
most of all the stuff is online right now under the Department of Health and Senior Services website.
Okay.
I'm not 100% sure of the process, but soon you will start, and if you haven't already, start seeing doctors pop up. That I believe there's one over on 40 Highway that will, for $200, evaluate you and see if you meet one of the criteria for being able to have it, and they will give you a piece of paper that says this person would benefit from the use of medical marijuana. You take that information in and you apply online through the state, and it's a $25 fee or something like that annually, and then they will issue you a card within 30 days or
Alrighty.
deny your application if it turns out that you don't meet one of the qualifying criteria.
Okay, thank you.
Go ahead, sir.
Todd Johns. First, I want to say thanks for the forum. I'm an employer. I have a retail business here in the city and also in Kansas City, Missouri. Will there be any information coming out for employers and things that may affect us related to this, and also retail businesses, just so that we're informed and that we can educate our managers, our staff, around this topic as well, because it's going to be new for everybody.
For example, if you have an employee that has a medical marijuana card?
That would be one. If we have impairment issues with employees or customers, I mean, just any of that topic. It's going to be new for everybody, so education will be a good thing for us.
Yeah,
Go
I
ahead,
think at least the way I saw it play out in Colorado and the way that I've been kind of hearing people talk about it now is it's generally going to be up to each individual business as to whether or not they want to allow that for their employees or not, because it is still a federally banned substance. Employers have every right to say that their employees can't be under the influence of that while at work. I don't think this is in any way trying to take that ability away. And some professions where you need a DOT license, those are handled by the federal government as well, and so those are federally administered drug tests which test for marijuana. And so there are just going to be some people, even if the company says yes, we're okay with this, if you have a doctor's prescription or certification, then a certain employer may say that's okay, just don't come to work impaired or any of that, just like the company may have a policy now about coming to work impaired by alcohol. But some people may just, depending on the type of job they have, just not be able to utilize medical marijuana because they won't be able to pass some of those federal drug tests.
I think where it might get a little cloudy is this is now considered medical versus just purely recreational. If it's alcohol, I don't think any of us consider that medical. But if someone is on painkillers, they're nursing a bad back or something like that, it's now becoming in the same category. So it's going to be a little blurry for us.
Yeah.
And I think my real question is not so much to parse each one of these questions or issues, but will the city be coming out and providing some information to businesses here in the community to kind of help all of us understand what the ordinances are and such?
I'm going to go out on a limb and say that the city will not give a business direction on how they should handle their employees. However, there may be some avenues we could put you in the right direction. For example, I would recommend Chamber of Commerce as a resource for how to get these business-related questions answered on employees. Also, maybe your insurance carriers may weigh in and have certain recommendations for that on how you handle those employees.
Very good.
And we'd be happy to try to point you in the right direction and maybe look at resources, but I have not heard any discussions amongst the city staff at any level to say, here's how a business will handle their employees.
Yeah, correct. Okay, thank you very much.
Hi, I'm John Welchert. The question I have pertaining to is a qualifying patient cultivation identification card. An individual can grow up to 6 plants. If they're also a caregiver, they can have up to 3 patients that they take care of, and they can grow up to 6 plants for each of those individuals. So one person in one location in a residential setting or an apartment setting could grow up to 24 plants. Are there any codes, city codes, fire codes, inspections, or process in place to make sure that this is safe?
The city does not have the ability to, I think, put a cap on the number of plants that's allowed by the state. And so I don't think the city has any intention of trying to, enforce a lower number of plants. I do know that our building department and our fire districts, especially Central Jackson County, have done extensive research on this and have been out to Colorado and to other cities to look at these home grow operations and to make sure that what to look out for, such as what chemicals are they using to try to extract the oil out of the marijuana. Like butane is extraordinarily flammable, and so there's some state laws that say you can't use that. But the fire department has gone out there, and they're actually working with our building department at this time to see if we do need to update our building codes. All of the typical building codes would still need to be followed in terms of residential building codes for plumbing and electrical and moisture management and things of that nature. So I just don't know if we've had identified if we have to make any additional code changes when we adopt our code cycle later this year.
Okay, so once they receive the qualifying patient cultivation identification card, they don't have to make any additional applications to the city to become a cultivator?
No,
So you don't know if they're doing it or not
that's correct.
until somebody complains or you have an issue with it.
That's correct.
That's
So in that
correct.
residence, you'll have excessive electricity use, excessive moisture and mold issues, and if that is an apartment or a multiple residential complex, you've got problems.
Yes.
And there's no way you have to regulate it.
I don't know if we've looked into how to regulate it, but again, we're still looking at some additional regulations probably within the next 6 months. So that may be something that we end up doing.
Thank you.
Miranda, do you have any other questions from social media?
I do have a couple more that has just come in. We have a question from Lisa Wolf. She wants to know, can only certain doctors evaluate you to see if you qualify for a medical marijuana card?
I believe it's any doctor that is licensed by the state of Missouri.
And then we had another question on the timeline of the opening of the dispensaries and when we'll start seeing that. Has that timeline been pushed back since some of the original literature has been published about this?
Yeah, I think so. I think originally people said, maybe at the beginning part of 2020, but the fact that, these, even if the licenses were granted and awarded starting tomorrow, some industry experts that I've talked to said that even the fastest flowering plant is still 9-10 weeks, and so and I may be off on that, but it's still a considerable amount of time. So it's not like overnight, because it all has to be grown within the state, and so it's not like there's a truck that's going to come in from Colorado and just open up shop, because all of the products have to be tracked to where they were grown in the state and where they ended up. And if there's any, actually, it's tracked to the point that if there's any extra marijuana, say if a terminal patient passes away, then there's a process in the state law which says how their excess marijuana is supposed to be turned back in, so that it is always tracked. And I also believe that when the private citizen with their card goes into purchase the marijuana at the dispensary, they basically are going to run your driver's license, your card, like a driver's license. It's going to tell that patient how much they're allowed to buy, because you're only allowed to buy a certain amount for a certain amount of time. And so if I believe that if it shows that you're over your amount, that you've been to the dispensary 4 times in 4 days, then they're going to deny your ability to buy it. So the tracking system that the state has put into place, which is one of the reasons why it's taken so long to get up and running, is pretty sophisticated.
Thank you.
Your turn.
Hi, my name is Mandy Marshall. My question, as a millennial, I'm particularly interested in how the housing market and the housing crisis squeezes us out of the ability to own homes. Has the city council, the board, or your department thought about how they can protect patients' rights from landlords putting undue burden on patients throughout the state, if they're renters or if they're not able to own their own homes here in the city?
We have not had those discussions. I don't believe that there's anything in the state law that addresses whether or not a private landlord can make rules as to what they can and what tenants can and can't do in the building. I would guess that it'd be very similar to a landlord who doesn't want any smoking in the unit. So I believe that those laws are there to protect the landlord. I know we at the city have not had any discussion about that.
I'm particularly interested in how patients in the state of Missouri wouldn't be treated so much as smokers, but as patients who are getting medical, because it is medical, not recreation in this state. Ooh.
Right.
Is that something that the city council or your department would be interested in learning more about or protecting?
Yeah, we're always interested in learning more about it. I used smoking just as a reference because it's more commonly found in leases sometimes, but I definitely think a landlord would have the ability to say there's no cultivating of marijuana on my property. As the property owner, they still have that right to do that. So, but that's something we can look into and see if some of our neighboring cities have maybe looked at this. We're not alone in this picture. All of the other cities in Missouri are grappling with the same issues. And we tend to borrow a lot of good ideas from other cities. And so that's definitely something we can look into, though.
Thanks.
Mike, I have another question. Actually, it's a 2-part question I was given. And I'm going to ask it and I'm going to answer it probably, but I want you to tell me if I answer it correctly. So I think it's important to get out there. It's because they're good questions. What, if anything, can the citizens of Blue Springs do to stop or delay a dispensary from coming into the city? And then who would make the final decision on having a medical marijuana dispensary in Blue Springs? So based on what I've learned tonight, if I understand correctly, the citizens of Blue Springs can't do anything to stop a dispensary from coming in. And the state makes a final decision on where they go.
Yes, that is correct.
Okay.
So as part of the application to the state, the applicant has to provide maps and certifications and surveys that show that they're complying with all the separation distances from schools, churches, and daycares, as well as a copy of any of the city's ordinances that they may have adopted, any rules or regulations. And that all goes over to the state, and then the state issues the license. The city does not. And the way we have our zoning set up is that we made all of our medical marijuana facilities uses by right. So if it's in the zone, so if it's a dispensary that wants to open in the general business zone, the city is not going to stop them in any way.
Go ahead. Right up.
My name's Derek Ford. I was curious, have the officers had any training on how to certify that a patient is legal and that they're allowed to have the 4 ounces on them?
Any training as to, we've seen copies of the medical marijuana card. I've shared that with our staff. We will share the ordinances that are adopted in the future and made as part of the code of ordinances. We'll share that with the officers. As far as the amounts, they'll have to weigh that and process that as they would right now with, say you catch somebody with marijuana right now and you have to weigh it because at one level it's a felony and one level it's not, etc.
Sure.
So we have methods of doing that. So we'll have to process that and
Okay.
do that.
I think the biggest fear is getting caught with it, right? That's the most dangerous thing about this plant. To clarify, we do have over 22,000 patients legal in Missouri now, the
Yes.
majority of which are growing. He said we can only have 6 plants. I wanted to clarify we can have 18 plants, the patients can. And they can have more than that if the doctor says so.
Okay. And those 18 plants are like, there's flowering and
Yeah, they're
non-flowering and all this.
3
correct?
stages. The baby stage is under 14 inches in vegetative state. You can have a vegetative plant over 14 inches, 6 plants there, and then 6 plants in flower form. So that's your collective 18.
And the amount of marijuana that a person can have is you said 4 ounces. It's not really a whole lot, but it'll last a long time, correct?
Right, that's their month limit.
Right. So I think the importance is not, if you're a citizen and you're wanting to get your medical marijuana certification or
Certification.
card, or I call it a card. If you have that and you're following the ordinances, you've got nothing to be afraid of. If you're consuming it at your home,
All right.
if you're using it appropriately, if you're growing it appropriately, we're not going to come knocking on your door.
And the other part, the state specified to look the other way until the dispensaries are open. You guys aren't allowed to ask the patients where they got their medicine right now.
Yeah, we're not.
Okay, just wanted to clarify. Thank you, guys. You guys are doing a great job. We appreciate you.
I've got another one for you.
Sure.
Okay. Let me go back to it here. Lisa Pratt wants to know, are the medical cards for just the state that they're issued in, or can you buy in the other states that allow medical marijuana also?
I've been asked this question, and it's a bit of a tricky answer. I believe that I don't think you can take Missouri medical marijuana over to Kansas because they don't have a medical marijuana program there. I don't know if you can take it to Colorado with you. Actually, they probably wouldn't care because it's recreational there anyway. But I do know that there was one provision in the Constitution that basically said if you have kind of like a reciprocity almost, like if you have a medical marijuana card from a different state, it allows you to possess in Missouri the marijuana you bought from that state. It doesn't allow you to come in to Missouri and buy marijuana from a Missouri medical marijuana company. So it basically allows you to have what you've bought legally in the state that you reside, but just because you have an Oklahoma medical marijuana card, that is not, I believe, valid in Missouri, because each state has a different list of conditions that qualify medically for what they may, physical health conditions, and so not all states are equal. That we did it, and so that's at least my understanding of it.
Come on up to the podium so everybody can hear you.
I'm an owner of the Green Cross MO, the Medical Marijuana Certification Clinic. My understanding is there's 16 states that are reciprocal. Some states want you to reach out to them ahead of time to provide proof and pay their fee, and they'll send you a temporary ID. I think that's my understanding. And then when it comes to doctors, about 80% of doctors can't write recommendations because they're federally funded. So there's that.
Thank you. Mr. Welcher?
Yes, John Welchert again. Summary of Amendment 2, some of the main provisions. It talks about you can purchase at least 4 ounces. And it also goes on to say that you can possess at least a 60-day supply. I'd like to know how much a 60-day supply consists of.
I guess it depends on how fast you consume it. I don't know. I don't know the answer to that question.
8 ounces.
8 ounces?
Or equal to, depending on if it's concentrate or an edible.
8 ounces are equal to if it's an edible.
You have to have 2 doctors' signatures to get another 4 ounces. So you got 1 doctor's signature for the first 4 ounces, but to get another 4 ounces, you need
So you have to have 2 doctors to get signatures. So you can have up to 8 ounces if you get.
That's considered a 60-day supply?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
I'm glad they were here to answer that.
With 1 doctor's signature. Yeah.
With 1, okay. Any other questions from the board? Go ahead, Neil.
I had a patient ask, and I didn't have an answer because I've had the flyers out. Teenager asked, why can't you get the medical marijuana at CVS? And I didn't have a good answer, like at Walgreens.
Well,
or
the state has
pharmacy.
mandated where it comes from. So it can only come from a medical marijuana dispensary. So it's not a prescription. So as Mike said earlier, you just can't take a prescription from a doctor. It's not the same principle. It is a certification issued by the state that allows you to possess 4 ounces or up to 8 ounces in a 60-day supply, but it's not a prescription. So it's not something you just run to CVS and get.
I guess the question then he asked, well, why is it not a prescription?
Because the state said it's not. And
Okay.
no, I think technically it's still a federal crime to possess marijuana. It's not. It's still a controlled substance to the feds. So they're not going to give a prescription for a controlled substance of that nature. Is that a quick summary?
That's my understanding as well. And also, because the pharmacies do sell or distribute prescriptions for controlled substances that they're allowed to do through the federal government control or schedule whatever substances, OxyContin and pretty strong drugs that way. I don't think the pharmacies want to risk losing that ability by becoming a dispensary.
Okay.
Miranda, one last time for social media. Any questions?
I've got another one here. What kind of license, or do you need a license to work for the pot shops from, say, an accounting, IT, shipping, etc. line of work?
You do need to get a card, a certified card, or I believe some other. There is a big background process for anybody that works in the marijuana industry. So, and I think it even extends to anybody that's doing temporary work in a such as a construction job or a plumber or somebody who's doing work in a facility. I believe they all have to have background checks and criminal background checks and things of that nature. I don't remember it all off the top of my head, but it was pretty lengthy to make sure that those people who are working in the industry have been screened.
Thank you.
All right. Any other questions for the audience before we wrap up for tonight? Okay. On behalf of the board, I just want to say thank everybody for coming. And if you have any questions, we'll be around for a little bit too, if you were too shy to come up and ask. And then as always, you can reach out to myself or Mike with the city or the city attorney with questions or members of the board. We can try to get answers to your questions. And I'll turn it back over to Chair.
I will entertain a motion to adjourn. We have a motion and seconded. Those in favor? Aye. Opposed? We are adjourned.
Thank you, everyone. Appreciate it.